Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. This is Season 7, Episode 16. I'm very happy to introduce guest Nik Sharma to the program. I've long associated with Nik's writing, and he is someone I've always wanted to talk to. I could not have been more happy talking to Nik in his magnificent blue kitchen. These are the days when the podcast for me is so magical, getting a chance to speak with someone whose columns in various publications I've read over the years. Truly, I feel blessed today. Nik could not have been more fun and pleasant guest, and I would have him on the podcast again in a heartbeat. Nik Sharma is a molecular biologist, cookbook author, and food photographer who has contributed to Serious Eats since 2020, The Guardian Feast, and Food 52 as well. He has also contributed to the New York Times. I remember with fondness his stint as a former food columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, a local paper for me, whose food section is unparalleled. His first cookbook, Seasoned Big Flavors, Beautiful Food, was a finalist for the James Beard Foundation Award in an International Association of Culinary Professionals Award. Nik's second cookbook was award-winning and much nominated The Flavor Equation, Chronicle Books, October 2020, focuses on the science of flavor and how we interact with it. You can read his blog, The Brown Table, and his magnificent recipes there by going to the link in the bio. Without further ado, I'm going right to the interview. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today, I'm talking to food writer and vlogger and scientist, Nik Sharma. Nik, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Dean.
Now, I loved reading your bio as much as I loved reading your blog and watching your videos. Your videos are very charming and fun, and you make
thank you.
You make watching them really entertaining because you add a little bit of you add a little bit of science and some info and like cooking demonstrations, but you also always have a little bit of good cheeky humor in there, like when you include your pets and stuff.
I'm glad you feel that way.
No, they're just really, really charming. Now, you originally moved from Bombay, India to America to study molecular genetics. What were some of your foods you discovered in the United States that excited you when you arrived?
That's a good question. Let's see if I can remember correctly. I think one of my earliest memories was going to the grocery store. And in India, we don't have, at least at the time when I lived in India, we didn't have these huge supermarkets that we now have here, or we had then. And I remember just going through simple things like the jam aisle where the preserves and marmalades, I have a sweet tooth. And I remember just looking at the overwhelming number of choices.
Yeah.
Something that we did get jam in India. It's not that we didn't, but there were just so many choices, not only by just one brand, but by several different brands from different parts of the world. So to me, that was just fascinating. And then, of course, there were vegetables vegetables that I had never seen or heard of, like zucchini, pumpkin, butternut squash. Butternut squash was something that was new to me. So there were all these different ingredients that were just literally foreign to me, that it was so exciting to walk into something as everyday and banal as a supermarket and just get a chance to try them.
You worked for a time in public health policy in Washington, D.C. That sounds pretty exciting. What was that like for you?
So I didn't work in public policy, but I did go to school in public policy at Georgetown, and I did that for 2 years. I went to the School of Public Policy while I was working in research at Georgetown. So I've actually never worked in the public policy spectrum.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, did you like living in Washington, D.C.? That can be a very exciting area. There's so many really cool things locally, and you're kind of attached to so many states in that area. Was that a thrilling time for you?
I loved it. That's the city where I think I would say I formed most of my strongest friendships and bonds with people, because I lived there for so long. I moved there from Cincinnati, Ohio to Washington, D.C., and it was definitely a much more larger metropolitan city than Cincinnati, Ohio was. So in that sense, I got exposed to several different cultures. DC has a large Ethiopian and Eritrean population. So that was a completely new style of food that I discovered. As you mentioned, also, it's Virginia, Maryland are the two states that are next to DC, and I would go there often. Actually, we would spend a lot of time because um, they're so close. You can just take the metro, hop on the metro and get off. And there are all these different restaurants, all these different wonderful people to meet. So I've lived there for a really long time, more than any other city that I've lived in America. And that still is, I think of it as a second home.
Now, I read in your bio, you had one part that kind of arrested me as a parent. You said, much to the vexation of my parents, you decided to quit your career in science and transition into cooking. How did that talk go initially?
Difficult. I come from a family where neither of my parents are doctors or engineers, but I think coming from a South Asian family, it's something that your parents always want you to be in careers that generally have a higher degree of success and higher degree of stability, or at least from what they've heard. And my dad's family he has a lot of doctors in his family, so it was and I was also leaning towards biology in school.
Yes.
So even I thought for a while that I would end up in medicine, and I almost did, but making that transition and talking to them about it was probably the most difficult thing that I've ever done in my life, because they were definitely not for it. They were quite stressed out because they said, well, you're going to be freelancing. For the longest time, my parents also, I don't know, I think they may still feel this too, that I don't hustle enough, or I'm not a good hustler. And for those kind of careers where you're freelancing, you definitely have to have a certain confidence in hustling, but doing it right. And I think that was the biggest, and also just making us, a steady income that's stable professionally, which is, I think any parent honestly would be a little frightened for their child. And so they weren't at all supportive initially. And luckily I had the backing of my husband at that point.
Now, you worked for a stint in a professional pastry kitchen. Can we talk about that for a bit?
Absolutely. Let's see. So I had moved to California from DC at the time. My husband was changing careers. He worked in the military, was a military consultant, and then wanted to just walk away from all of that. And so we moved to California for that. So I told him, I said, hey, so I'm still working in research, but I kind of want to make a career change too. What if we, what if I could do that? And I said, I kind of want to go to culinary school, but before we take the plunge into school loans and stuff, and I'd never had a school loan at the time, which is what scared me. I also knew that most chefs don't end up on TV or become famous. So it's not, at the time, like the Food Network and the Cooking Channel were quite popular, and the hope was that everyone who was in that field would somehow end up on TV. And I wasn't very confident that would happen. So I wanted to play it safe. So I worked at the pharmaceutical place that I was employed by, and we were doing research during the day. And I told them for the next 2 weeks, I lied, and I told them for the next 2 weeks, I have a family emergency that I need to take care of, but I'll come in late and get my work done and leave late. They were fine with that. So in the meantime, instead of going to cooking school, and I'd applied to a couple of cooking schools, I simultaneously also reached out to several pastry shops, because initially that's what I thought I wanted to do in cooking. And I reached out to, I think, 12 or 15 pastry shops in my area. One person called me back, and I interviewed with them, and she said, if I offer you the job, I won't be able to pay you as much as you're getting paid at the pharmaceutical company. And I said, yeah, that's fine. I kind of expected that. I didn't expect it to be that low.
Yeah.
But I just needed to give it a shot, or I felt that I would go through life regretting never taking the plunge and always thinking about it. What if I took it and I didn't like it? At least I knew I tried it. It wasn't for me, and I walked away. So I would bike to the pastry place in the morning for the next 2 weeks. And I think I would leave at 4, get there about 4:30, and we would begin working by about 5. And by about noon, I was done. I did that for 2 weeks. I loved the job so much. And everyone was so supportive who I worked with at this pastry shop called Sugar Butter Flower. It's located in South Bay, in the San Francisco South Bay area,
Oh,
and
nice.
it was wonderful. And I came back to my husband. I said, you know what? I really love this. I want to quit. And we kind of balanced the books and we made it happen. And I did that for a little over a year. And before I moved to Oakland, I was living in I was living in Santa Clara at the time. And I would say that was probably the pivotal moment in my life where I knew I had done the right thing for myself.
See, I didn't know you had lived in the Bay Area here. That's where I live and am now. That's really wonderful. Did you have any favorite restaurants when you were living in the Bay Area?
Let's see. Most of my favorite restaurants, I will say, are in Oakland. I'm going to get in
Yeah.
trouble for saying this.
No, there's some great
But
restaurants in Oakland.
the what was the fried chicken place that community center in Oak by IKEA? The place where you it opened up
Yes,
like in the last. You know what I'm talking
Brown
about? They
Sugar
had a
Kitchen.
no, it's not brown sugar. It's Miss something, Miss Holly's or Miss Ollie's.
It sounds familiar.
Well, okay, so I can't remember the name, but that's a place that I used to go often for fried chicken. It was amazing. It was in this community space which they shared with different restaurants. Um, let's see, there was also Juhu Beach Club, which was via it's now no longer there anymore, but by Preeti Mystery, which was an amazing place. Because she used to give this, she had a fun take on Indian food. Then let's see, I'm trying to think if there's something in San Francisco. I mean, I would say Tartine. I
Oh
do like
yeah,
Tartine, and it has a special place in my heart because that was probably the first place that I tried really good sourdough bread.
yeah.
And I had just come from DC, and I remember even when we were looking at California before we moved, Tartine was one of the places that I visited. And so I really like the food that they serve there, and Tartine Manufactory, which opened up right when we were leaving to move to LA, was another fantastic place.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's so many places. I kind of put you on the spot by asking you that. I'm sorry. This was so surprised. I want to talk about a brown table. This is an acclaimed blog, and you've had it for quite a while. What was the impetus to start the blog for you, and what has been the reaction and kind of some of the feedback you've gotten from it as you've had it over the years?
To be honest, I didn't have any what you call any goals behind the blog. The time when I started the blog, I was still working in research. I had no desire to go into the food world, even in writing, because I had no experience. My background was in science. And I just wanted to, I would needed a creative outlet because what happened at the time was it was research during the day and I was going to public policy school in the evening. So I was so entrenched in academia. There was nothing else that I was doing for beyond my career. I needed
Right.
something fun. And that's when I started the blog of Brown Table. And the blog is kind of a beast. I think like most, like even the podcast, like your podcast or social media platform, is that you keep feeding it and it's a beast. You keep feeding it, it wants more and you keep producing
Yeah,
more.
absolutely.
Um, right. And that's I think what led to the growth of the blog, but it also made me realize this is what I really get excited to do when I wake up in the morning. It's what I think about before I go to bed. And I realized this might just be my calling. And the blog, because at the time blogs were such a visual medium, photography was quite popular. Then I had to train myself how to photograph for the blog. And that's what led me to make it also such a visually strong platform, at least my blog. So my recipes are accompanied by photos, and I'm also love the aspect of cooking more than actually the final dish that I present. Of course, I love the dish that I present to people, and I think a lot of blogs focus on the end photos quite a bit. I focus more on the steps that lead you there, because for me that's a reason why I left cooking, because all the I find the steps fun. Getting those ingredients is a fun thing for me. Watching food ingredients transform into something that's nutritious and edible is something that I get completely enthralled by.
I mean, you do such a great job with it too. I mean, you're just seeing your food photography and then even just your vlogs, which not everybody does well, but you do really well. You make everything look really
Thank you.
delicious and inviting and fun. So they're really kind of very engaging. Your writing, has been so well received. You've written columns for Serious Eats, The Guardian, Food 52, the San Francisco Chronicle locally, and more. Did you ever think this would come to pass when you started writing? Did you ever kind of dream that this would be the case?
No, because I had no idea what I was getting into. I think I've been very fortunate and blessed on my journey. Um, my first entry into the world of food media writing was with the San Francisco Chronicle. At the time, I was working for a startup in San Francisco as the food photographer. And I was so fed up of working because it was a very demoralizing experience for me. Everything was about, at least in my case, I was in charge of styling and taking photos, not in creating the food. But there was a big problem. There was a gap at the time between what customers were receiving and the photos that were going on in their app, where my manager would constantly berate me, and she actually put me on notice, I think, because the photos looked nicer than the food that customers were getting. So the customers were complaining. And for someone who's like performing their job well, that's kind of a shitty thing to go through.
Yeah.
And it's demoralizing. So I really wanted to walk away. I'd done that for a year. And I really, really, really wanted to just run away from that situation because it was affecting me emotionally. And I started looking for jobs, and I reached out to the San Francisco Chronicle. I reached out to a writer, John Birdsall, who also was based in Oakland at the
Yeah.
time. He now lives in Arizona. And John introduced me to the then editor of the San Francisco Chronicle, Paolo Lucchesi. And I said, hey, I knew my strength was photography. And I said to him, so I photograph a lot of food. I'm looking for freelance photography jobs. He said, okay, send me your portfolio, and then I can take a look and with my team, and we'll come back to you. So he said, give me a couple of weeks. He comes back after a week and tells me, we looked at your work and we think your strength is writing recipes and also photographing them. Would you be interested in writing a full-time column for us? And I was shocked because that's not what I walked into. And so here's an editor who I will always be grateful for, who took a chance on me out of the blue and opened up a completely new door. And I became the San Francisco Chronicle's recipe columnist. I hate saying food columnist because then people think I critique restaurants.
Right.
So I became their food columnist for over 6 years, I think, 5.5 to 6 years. And I loved that job. And then I quit after I moved to Los Angeles. It was probably one of the most transformative experiences of my career because, bloggers are often not taken seriously. But once you start writing for media outlets, you start getting some street credibility, which is an awful thing to say. But that's what happened. And then that eventually led up to new doors where I was able to write for Serious Eats, Food 52, the New York Times, Guardian, and Washington Post. So it definitely was a game changer.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org. In 2018, you wrote your first cookbook to critical acclaim. This was Seasoned, Big Flavors, Beautiful Food. And the book was an exploration of using spices to reinvent recipes in the American South and California. Many Indian spices were featured here. What inspired you to write this cookbook?
So Season was my first cookbook, and there was one thing I wanted to do with Season was talk about my personal journey because I didn't know whether the book would be well received, whether I would get a chance to write a second book. So I thought it was an important pivotal moment for me to talk about who I was, where I came from, where I lived, and how my experiences, both past and present, had influenced my style of cooking. Because I don't really cook Indian food. I'm kind of at the cross point where I'm cooking immigrant food, where whatever I've experienced in my life, both in America, my adopted home country, as well as in India, where I was born and raised, all of those influences come together. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do with the cookbook. And I didn't want to shy away from who I was. And so that's what Season was. It was about the seasons in my life that shaped me, but also literally like a book on using seasonings and spices in cooking. Because for me, you can make a potato salad a million times, but what makes it special is the way you season it, the way you flavor it, what goes inside, that brings, for me, a richer story.
Now, the book was a finalist for the James Beard Foundation Award and an International Association of Culinary Professionals Award. And in addition to this was also selected as one of the best cookbooks of the year by the New York Times, the Washington Post, Food 52, The Kitchen, The Observer, and the Sunday Times, to name a few. That's no small feat. Did this kind of validate your journey from when you had to talk to your parents about this career change to full? Was that like full circle for you?
I think my parents definitely saw that as success. They definitely were like, okay, definitely like this is, I think for my parents, the one thing my parents have mentioned to me, they feel that since I didn't grow up in America, for the first like 20 years of my life, they feel proud of these moments because to them, I came from nothing and I grew up very poor. So I came from nothing. And then to get recognized by your peers in an industry that you also have actually I don't have that much training in. So I think for them, that was like, okay, maybe he really does have the talent to do this. So I think that helped, definitely helped. But I didn't expect all of that. I think awards are good, they're important, but they also don't mean much at the end of the day. I shouldn't say that, but whatever.
Now, your second cookbook was The Flavor Equation, The Science of Great Cooking Explained in More Than 100 Essential Recipes. Now, you combined your background in science with cooking here, as I've seen you do in your vlogs. I remember in a YouTube video, you're using the working of lactic acid in a lamb biryani recipe. How much do you think about science when you're cooking, or is it interchangeable for you?
I don't think twice about it, to be honest. I think because I came from a heavy research background, and that's all that I was trained to do all my life, it's probably second nature to me. Because even sometimes I'll talk to my husband and I think it really, like, he rolls his eyes, he'll answer me, but I'll be staring at something and I'll say, oh, like, do you feel like, I think let me see. One of the most ridiculous things, according to him, that I asked him, and even my mother thought this was ridiculous, was about the way our windows were facing each other. And I like geometry a lot in algebra. And I said, oh, it looks like the quadrants are intersecting, like everything's, like there are tangents to the way our windows are framed when the shadow hit them. And he said, what? And so I told my mother about it, and she said the same thing. What? I think there's definitely like that nerdy thing that I don't think is nerdy. It just comes naturally to me, and most people think it's very bizarre. But for me, in terms of cooking, it's been really helpful because often in cookbooks, when I started out, I would read recipes, but not many of them would work, but I couldn't understand why they worked. And for me, that's so important because I want to take the knowledge that a book has taught me and apply it to a recipe at home. But what if it doesn't work? Or is there a better, shorter way to get to that answer? Can I, do something more with this? Can I stretch the recipe out or the food for like a week without affecting quality? And so these are the things that I feel the answers lie in science. And it's not something that I've, discovered or something. There's a whole body of food science research that's been taking place for many, many years. And, those details are published in research papers. And that's where I go and look for answers, unless it's said. And then often also in books that do talk about science, there are often a lot of observational claims that are made, and coming from a heavy research background where we published papers where numbers are what matter, you need like statistically significant p-values. I always shudder when I read observational claims like, oh, it became crunchy, or it became sticky, or whatever, or shiny. Or I need a number to make me satisfied. So I search for answers, and I know I'll never get close to the truth because philosophically you get closer to something, but you never really get there. So I try to shave and try to come to an answer through different ways to feel secure in my mind when I share that information with people. So in the case of the lamb biryani, what I wanted to really understand was, how does yogurt affect marinades. And I remember talking to Chris Kimball, who is the behind the brains behind Milk Street. Chris had asked me a question on his radio show once. Do you know why people in India and a lot of people in South Asia marinate their meats in yogurt overnight? And at the time I had no answer. I said, that's a really good observation, Chris. I don't have the answer. I need to think about it. 1 year later, after doing a lot of research, the answer lay in the fact that, lactic acid is something that is produced by mammals, and we eat, meat and birds as well. And so lactic acid is produced by the muscles. So these bodies and these cells have developed to deal with lactic acid. On the other hand, neither vinegar nor citric acid are actually produced by the body. And when citric acid is produced, the body recognizes it as a toxic condition. So that means those cells are being affected. And that's why I feel like a lot of the answers that, when you read about food science, they're so generic that one rule applies to all. We lose the importance of things. And one of the benefits of doing this study and then writing that recipe on lamb biryani for serious seeds was people could actually marinate meat in yogurt and then stick them in the fridge and leave them for a long time. Keep it in the freezer, it won't affect quality. Now, if you did that with vinegar or citric acid, you wouldn't have the same results. And so, there are all these applied science things that can come out of something so simple that can make a cook's life easier. And that's what my goal is.
Your food photography is really well acclaimed, and we talked about it earlier, how you really have an eye for making things beautiful. And for the people on the pod who are listening to this podcast and can't see your kitchen, you have a beautiful kitchen. It's just really, really gorgeous. It's like Sunset Magazine ready. I just want to ask you, have you always kind of had an eye for design and for kind of color and things like that? Did that kind of play into your photography?
My dad's a professional. My dad's a trained artist and a professional photographer. But contrary to popular belief, a lot of people who know this assume that I might have somehow gained this knowledge from him. I actually didn't pick up a camera until I left home because he never let me. It was too expensive. He said, this is for work. You're not going to touch it. And then I did take some classes in art. So I do have a little bit of but I'm not that strong. I usually go with my intuition when I pick colors. Or even with this kitchen, I wanted it to be functional, but at the same time, I wanted to feel like a calming space for me that encourages me and motivates me to cook, and I feel energized. So I picked colors and finishing touches that make me really happy. So when I walk in here, I'm happy, and I feel it's a brand new kitchen. So yes, it's very clean and nothing's broken yet, but I feel that as of now, when I walk in, I'm definitely really happy. This is my happy space in the house because this is where I work and spend probably 80 to 90% of my day.
Oh, those cabinets are to die for, though. Oh my God, I really love it.
Thank you.
Who are some of the food writers that you like to read and you're inspired by?
Some of my favorite food writers include Diana Henry, who is she's a really close friend, but she's also been an amazing mentor over the years. Even before my first cookbook came out season, she's an amazing writer, and she, many writers try to achieve romance in their food writing. Diana successfully does that. She just builds a romantic mood around her food. Sometimes it's, sometimes it just makes you think about life, and she makes you stop and appreciate food, the senses, everything. Diana's the whole package for me. Another writer that I really love is Nigel Slater. Nigel Slater, again, builds romance through his foods. And maybe I am a romantic at heart, which is why I'm drawn to their writing. Nigel's recipes are also quite simple and approachable. Both Diana and Nigel do this very well, where you feel like you're living with them.
Yeah.
Another writer that I really love is Nigella Lawson, because her recipes are no fuss. She says, this is, you're busy during the week, this is what you need to make. And there's no judgment. It doesn't have to be an ingredient that you have to run around to find. I think one of her in her last book, one of my favorite recipes are the fish finger bharta. And for the longest time before I received the book, I thought she was going to ask people to make fish fingers and then make a bharta, but no, she actually just uses frozen fish fingers in the recipe, and there's no judgment there, which I think is something so important as food writers, is because we're striving to be excellent at the game, and it's a game at the end of the day, we're all striving to be excellent. there's this judgment call about don't use canned food, don't use canned beans, don't use frozen food because that's apparently worse than going and buying fresh. I think with food writers, it's a privileged business to begin with. I'm
Yeah.
doing something that's quite privileged. And we need to understand that not everybody comes from the same socioeconomic status. And everyone's at different levels. So if someone doesn't have the time or doesn't have the money to buy fresh beans, yes, it's problematic for society, but you can't judge them for going and buying something that's canned or frozen. And I feel also these days with food technology, it's not what it was during World War II. A lot
Right.
has changed significantly. Researchers, in fact, I would say a lot of foods are better bought frozen. A lot of ingredients are better bought frozen than they are fresh because the quality, the nutritional quality is much higher.
Yeah.
And I think we need to stop this attitude of judging. People should, yes, everyone should be able to have access to high quality food. And that is something that as a society we need to strive for. But at the same time, you can't berate people for not having those options available, or this is something they choose. And maybe they don't have the time also.
Were you ever instructed growing up in cooking, or did you always love cooking? Like when you were a young child, did you ever get a chance to cook with a relative?
I think early on, so my mother hates to cook, and my mother works for a hotel, ironically, and she's worked for hotels all her life in management. She hates cooking. My grandmother was probably her mother, my grandmother Lucy, was probably the biggest influence on my life in cooking because I spent a lot of time with her growing up as a child, where both my parents worked, so they would drop me and my sister off at their place, or they would pick us up. And I learned a lot of cooking from her, just like not even cooking with her, but just watching her. And Christmas is a big part of my mother's family, where every Christmas in December, everyone gets together we used to get together at my grandmother's large dining table and prepare sweets together. So, making food together, even as a child, was something that we did on special occasions. So it's something that was encouraged. And then even though I'm a male child, both my parents always encouraged me to cook because they wanted me to be self-sufficient, which was very important because they worked. They said, you're going to live alone at some point in your life. You need to know how to cook. So both my sister and me were given the freedom to use the kitchen. And then my mother had collected a lot of cookbooks and newspaper recipes from newspapers and magazines. And I would go through those and then practice cooking from those as a child. They never stopped me, which is very important. I think that's something that parents need to do to encourage children to be self-sufficient, because for me, that helped build confidence.
Right. What are you making for dinner tonight, if applicable? I always like to ask that of my guests.
Well, tonight I'm not making anything for dinner because I cooked a large pot of beans yesterday. So we're having that. We just got back from a trip, and so I'm trying to catch up with work. So today is work day. So it means a lot of emails and writing. But I made a really large pot of beans with a little bit of pancetta and the usual mirepoix, celery, carrots, onions, and then harissa just for some heat. And I simmered that for about 2 hours in the oven, which was perfect. And that we have leftovers, so we're going to eat that today. And then I'll think about dinner tomorrow.
Very nice. That sounds wonderful. What's next for you?
I'm working on 2 new cookbooks.
Oh, wow.
So I'm wrapping up the first of those, which comes out next fall. And then I'm going to take a month's break if my editor lets me. Then I'm going to start working on the next one, because the next one is going to be a much longer cookbook than anything I've written. So that requires a lot of mental focus. So I need to pay attention.
Very nice. I look forward to seeing both of those. Nik, I want to thank you for being on the program. I really enjoy getting a chance to talk to you. It's been a real honor.
That's just been amazing. Thank you for having me, Dean.
Thank you. That was my interview with the fun and wonderful Nik Sharma. You can go to the links in the bio to go to his blog, A Round Table, and also purchase his books on Amazon and other vendors through the links also listed on the bio. On Monday of next week, we're going to have a returning guest coming on. Laurel Woodward's going to be back talking about her brand new book coming out next week, A Backyard Garden Witchery. That'll be out that week also, and we're going to have links. You could buy that on the bio, and you could even pre-order it. And again, that's going to be Laurel Woodward, out next Monday. I hope you all have a wonderful week and have had a great 4th of July and great week, and have cooked up some wonderful foods. Until next time, keep cooking.
I've been getting